All right, welcome guys. So Eric, you haven't been on stage before. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
I don't have a mic yet.
Can we get Eric a mic? Take this for now.
Hello. So my name is Björk, and I am trying to become one of the block producers for EOS. So I am coming from one of what I believe is to become one of the future blockchains. And I'm here to, yeah, I don't know what to say really. Thank you.
All right, so let's start here with our first panel discussion, which I prepared actually yesterday. I got instructions on try to keep it as open as possible, but also try to get these people in debate, because I know that blockchain can be quite, interesting, but also important topic for people, and they might get, very fired up about it. So we'll start out with question number one, which is actually, so what I saw in the 90s was that large corporations such as Microsoft, they would actually try to get as big of a market as possible of the internet. So they would go out with Internet Explorer or Safari and try to get consumer adoption. How do you see this play out for the decentralized web? How do you see consumers adopting this part of the internet?
Okay, so I actually believe that we will not go towards just having one blockchain. I think we will go towards having multiple blockchains, and I'm really hoping that we will have multiple blockchains where the developers can actually organize between and help cooperate between the blockchains. That is the world I see us going towards, and possibly the underlying tech will be even more similar in the future than it is right now. We use different words to describe the same things between many of the blockchains, and we use different programming languages, and I think that's a good thing. There are pros and cons with all of it.
Yeah. All right, Michael?
I'm actually mic'd up now. So yeah, I completely agree that we are going to have a multitude of different blockchains and systems. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, in comparison, I mentioned in the talk, we're still in 1995. So this is super early, mostly tech early adopters, and that's completely fine because it's not sure yet. So I think to get to mainstream adoption, the actual tech needs to take a back seat. It doesn't matter if it's this blockchain or that blockchain. We need interfaces that look and act and feel exactly the same as the current interfaces do. So blockchain for me is really just infrastructure that enables new paradigms, new things happening, and for the consumer, it's really unimportant that blockchain is behind. So if we look at all the ICO projects out there right now, they're writing blockchain, 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 and I, at least myself, also have to take 15 minutes to understand what the actual use case is that they are addressing. And it's just because this is the hype phase. But we need to get away from that and talk about the actual use cases. What benefit does this bring to me as the consumer to get there? So I don't think it's one particular product. I think it's more of the infrastructure taking a back seat to the actual need.
Right. And how about you, Jörgen? How do you see this play out, the adoption of what we saw in the 90s with the adoption of the internet and a lot of websites just popping up? How do you see the adoption of the Web 3.0 taking place the next coming 3 years?
Good question. It's very hard to predict the speed in this field, and I think that ideally we would have one big blockchain for everything, because blockchains are about consensus. And the more blockchains we have, the more different states of consensus there are. So I do think we will have a multitude of blockchains, but I think the inherent drive is towards one blockchain. Now, why would we have decentralization at all? And there are two reasons for that. One is to drive creativity. The other one is that there will be a breakdown of trust in central institutions. So how quickly this technology will be adopted depends on if there is a breakdown in trust. Then things will go very rapidly towards decentralization. But even if there is no breakdown in trust, then decentralization, for example, in gaming, can work very much as a vehicle of creativity.
Mm-hmm. And also, so tying back to the large corporations, do you see any of those having a big impact on the consumer adoption of the blockchain? So for instance, we see Deloitte here at BLOXPO, we see Microsoft Azure doing their blockchain things. Do we see IBM taking a foothold of this industry? Do you see them having any long-term impact?
If they are being entrepreneurial, yes, but that can be hard for a big company to be. A blockchain is actually better at orchestrating small or medium-sized companies.
Yeah. All right. So tying back to the mid-90s, I remember the first killer apps was actually search, because there wasn't much you could do on a website. All you could do was maybe read through some information, some news, but then you could also search. So when that came, that really made a huge impact on the web. And also when we saw the first apps coming out for iOS and Android, what we saw there was impressive gaming. That was the first killer apps for that platform. And now, going back to the blockchain, where do you see the killer apps taking shape? What type of applications will drive the consumer adoption?
That's a really hard question. I think anyone who pretends to know where we are going with blockchain right now are like trying to pretend internet in the early. We have no idea where we are going. I think that I just want to modify or give my take on something that was said earlier. I do not see the value in just having one blockchain where everything is united. I think that communication between blockchains is the way to go. So we can have the different governance models on different blockchains, because we are trying to support the entire world, and everyone should be able to do it in their own way.
Right.
So I see something like EOS has inter-blockchain communication, or charting another. So I see something like that.
So I guess the important part there would be when we have, say, 1,000 or 1 million blockchains, that the consumer interface to them would be the exactly same,
Yes,
right?
It shouldn't matter to the consumer if the application is running with a blockchain backend or if it isn't. And today we have problems like block speed and stuff like that, and those problems will, of course, be solved in the infrastructure in the backend. And I mean, social media is huge on the internet, so social media on the blockchain will, of course, get huge.
Right.
Yeah.
So Michael, Jörgen, any thoughts about the killer apps of Web 3.0?
Definitely, yeah. I agree that it's pretty early to tell which are going to be those, but I think for early adoption, where I see the first steps happening, the most important ones are in two fields, and that is, first of all, identity, and second of all, stablecoins. So I'll go into each one in succession. So identity, meaning that you as a user, your identity is your private key, and your private key gets trust from institutions or other individuals. So you go to your bank, and your bank would then, you would show your ID, and they would trust your private key. And so with this now identity on the blockchain, this enables all the other use cases. Most of the use cases are useless without some form of identity on the blockchain. It doesn't need to be your official identity. It can be Cat Lover 13 identity. You can have multiple ones. But this, I think, is the first killer use case.
Could I add one thing to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. On EOS, instead of having your private key as your identity, you actually have an identity, and then you can connect different private keys with different privileges to that. So you can actually have one private key that you can use in say your cell phone, and if you want to transfer any amount larger than any amount that you select, you actually let that transaction sit for 6 hours or however long you define, and then you can cancel the transactions using your other private keys that are more high levered into your own account. So do you get that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, and Jörgen, how about the killer apps?
I agree with identity. I think that's is a very good one. And money. I mean, blockchains were made to handle money. That's the first use case of blockchains. And that depends on if trust is lost in what's called fiat money, then that will be a huge use case. But also institutions in general. We're working with land registries, and in some places, in some countries, it can be hard to trust a land registry if you then can have openness through a blockchain, because all credit comes from land. Banks give loans if there is something tangible that people can't steal and hide from the banks, and real estate fits that bill. So if you can get an efficient real estate thing on blockchain, it might actually add 1% or 2% on the GDP of that country if they're in a bad situation today in that field.
Yeah. I'm also quite surprised that you didn't mention decentralized exchanges, because that's what I see as like one of the first baby steps of actually not needing Coinbase or, you know, truly being a decentralized platform.
Don't we already have those?
Yeah, it's already coming. So
Yeah, I'm just not sure it matters for most consumers.
Right.
So
Good
that's why I
point.
don't see it as a killer app.
So do you think that the decentralized exchanges will be kind of techie app, or do you think that that will also reach?
No, I think they're gonna be hugely important because what I agree with from earlier is we're going to have these millions of chains, and we need interaction between those. Right. And the way to build that is a decentralized exchange. But it's just going to be infrastructure again, really unimportant for the people actually using it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So sorry if I can add to this. Yeah. I would really like to explain the stablecoin point, because I think for the audience that's super interesting, and one thing that you should definitely go look up, because this is really one of the best things out there in blockchain right now, in my opinion at least. And so there's this organization called MakerDAO, and they give out a coin now, a token that's called the DAI, and the DAI is fixed to the US dollar. So what we have now is a cryptocurrency fixed to the US dollar in a decentralized way. There's no US dollars in any bank stored that give this DAI the value. It's all through contracts for difference and different economic mechanisms that make it possible for that coin to keep its value pegged to the US dollar. So finally, we kill one really big point that people have against cryptocurrencies. It's volatile, and now it can be used for commerce. Now in the net.
Yeah, great point. But we also had a discussion about MakerDAO and other stable coins yesterday, and what someone said, which was really interesting, was how do these systems manage stress? Because we don't really know what if everyone wants to trade into MakerDAO, or what if everyone wants to trade into Tether, or another coin. I think that space is a bit risky still, and we haven't really tried it out fully.
Definitely, still super early stage.
Yeah.
But I think where we're going with this is for all these countries whose currencies are going down the drain, Venezuela and others, what people want is a store of value, and they want to spend it all over the world, no matter where they are. So it doesn't matter what it's pegged to, and what we're going to get to is we're going to have one number for each person, and this is their worth. It doesn't matter in which currency they're going to be able to spend it everywhere.
Right.
It's just stored value, basically.
Right. So with blockchain technology being so young and a lot of it being built on future promises and hype, how do you see us trying to convert the traditional developers and people who are already knowledgeable in computer science over to our decentralized camps to get them to actually build, decentralized applications? How can we get them to start getting interested in this space? Yes.
I think that blockchain technology is not that complex actually in itself. It's complex in its interaction with society. And that means that I think the best developers in the world are not interested in money that much. If you took the best Bitcoin developers or Ethereum developers in the world, and you would tell them that we'll quadruple your pay and make you do something really boring, they would just refuse. So we need to make distributed applications able to change the world, because that's what they want to do. They want to change the world. And as long as we focus on that, the developers will come by their own volition, I think.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I think for a lot of new developers, it might seem a bit daunting because, like you said, you're not just writing software, you're also handling other people's money. So, and as we saw with your presentation there, it can be a bit complex writing blockchain software. How can we get these traditional developers more interested? What do you think?
Well, in my experience, the issue you mentioned is not actually one for developers. Also being a developer myself, developers are really super unafraid. These are tinkerers. They don't care about consequences most of the time, and maybe after the fact a little bit. But what I see as the biggest barrier is the scamminess of many of these projects out there that take center stage. And that is really, in one way, you're saying about, yes, changing the world, but I find oftentimes the big developer masses, they do want to work on something meaningful, but they're not really into grandiose words. So they need to see the use behind it and the actual use case, and maybe even that it provides value for someone. And this we don't see with most of the projects currently out there. Because it's so early and these are still developing their applications in most cases. So they're not, we just had the funding period now, and now we're going to the application development. So I think in 1 or 2 years, when we have the first applications providing value, then a lot of developers will want to go in there when they see, oh wow, my mom, my neighbor, this is changing day-to-day life for them. And I think most are really turned away and turned down by all of the speculation.
Right. And Eric?
I agree with all of these points.
Yeah.
And I want to add that I think it's a great idea to start using languages that developers already know on blockchain development. Yeah.
All right, so as for our last question before we go out to the audience, competition is healthy, and we're seeing a lot of players trying to take into this space, such as Ethereum. We have Lisk, EOS, Neo, and so forth. Which platform do you think will gain the most traction?
Maybe I'm biased, just a little bit. I think, I want to emphasize once again that I don't think we will just need one platform. But I think that existing platforms today has some huge problems. I mean, transaction speed being one of them, and actually just knowing that your transaction has gone through. And I think EOS solves a lot of those problems. I mean, with block speed of 0.5 seconds and irreversible transactions in 1 second, and no transaction fee. I mean, it's hard to compete with. There are other platforms offering basically the same thing, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting moving forward. What I would really like to see is less infighting between the different blockchains and more cooperation. We are all of us are trying to solve the same problem basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Michael, which platform is your favorite?
I'm definitely sitting beside a person that's much more knowledgeable about this. I think Ethereum is great or has a lot of potential still, because the project is governed really well, in my opinion. Obviously, there's so many eyes on it and so many interests that it's always going to be difficult, but I think they're doing super well in how they manage it. And the second interesting project, obviously EOS is interesting, so maybe you can give a couple of words on the differences. I think Cardano is super interesting. Their problems are, it's maybe not that well managed, and they have a lot of infighting, but just technology-wise, super interesting, and very smart people, also from an academic background, working on that project, so I think that has potential.
And Jörgen, favorite platform?
Well, partial again, I suppose. We have Chromapolis, but going beyond that, I'm not sure, but I mean, there's a lot of scammy stuff in this field, but it also means that millions of dollars are released to people who do whatever they want, and some of them will be really, really bright. So it is very exciting to see the projects that we're talking about, EOS, Cardano, Ethereum, Decred, and all kinds of other systems where they will go. But I think it's early days yet. What's also important is developer mindshare, and I think Ethereum has done really well there. It's also a welcoming community. Bitcoin can be slightly abrasive sometimes. Yeah. So it's developer community plus some really, really bright people, and we may not know who those people are yet.
So because we're drawing many parallels to the early days of the web, do you think that this is sort of like the browser wars, where they will implement their own proprietary implementations of how to read HTML? Is that where we are right now? And maybe a couple of years down the road, we will need something like a World Wide Web consortium for the blockchain, where we can unite on a single protocol but have different blockchains built up of that. What do you think?
I think we are in the space right now where we are trying separate ways of moving forward, which as we move forward, we will start to see which ways actually works. And I think the more ways we try right now, the better it is.
Yeah.
So some people like some of the things in EOS, for example, then fork it. Fork it, remove the things you don't like, and see if that works. That's, since we will have communication between blockchains and EOS, we can still communicate, and we could even theoretically use the same token on both of them. So it would be beneficial for both of the networks if both of the networks succeed. And that's a huge incentive for developers, in my opinion, to get in on them.
And how do you see it? Do you think that we should have some sort of central governance agency for blockchain, or are we headed there?
Well, it has its roots in cypherpunk, and blockchain is made to not be governed. That's the whole idea. It's culture, not structure on a deep level. And it might be that we will get to something that looks like a blockchain. It was actually a trust-based model with a third-party risk. We don't know. But I think that once people understand what the blockchain is for, they will not accept proprietary solutions. It's very much against the basic spirit of the idea.
All right. So to the audience then, any questions to our panel? Yes. Can we get the... Yep. You, sir?
Yes. Elaborating on what you said, I have a concern that the incentives for the intermediaries today that have power and control, they are very high to remain that power and control. So obviously they will try to develop their own private blockchains or industry or sector specific blockchains. And I'm a bit concerned that we will have a future where, you know, public blockchains, they are around, of course, and maybe they are 20% of the blockchains, and the other majority will be private, because of the incentives they have to actually keep their control. How do you see that, and what's the kind of risk or likelihood that that will happen?
Yeah, we have a trust-based model in society, and people will try to go that way and call it blockchain, absolutely. I saw one big company that said you can run your blockchain in our cloud, and I was thinking, well, that's a single point of failure right there. So I mean, that blockchain is everywhere right now, but there must be a specific need for it, and that's where we need entrepreneurship. And when we have entrepreneurship, it will be obvious why a blockchain solution is superior. In other cases, it may not be needed.
Okay. More questions from the audience? Yes, you, sir.
Yeah, I like the use cases. When you talked about the use cases, you mentioned that real estate and the identity management. In addition to that, what I think is in the authentic news, right? Today, we really seriously lack on providing the news in a way that it is authentic. I don't know, am I reading the right news or it's just cooked up? So that I think is a good use case. What do you guys think about it?
Is there a right news?
Yeah, the question is, providing
But,
authentic news. Is it reliable? Is it coming from the true source? Is it cooked
I
up?
really like the that blockchains are irreversible. You can always, if someone changes their word, you can always go back and see it. So, in my opinion, at least some of the news organizations out there are using propaganda, and that won't be possible on the blockchain because people will always see when they change their narrative. It's just not like changing a web page on your page anymore.
But if you think on a holistic picture, end of the day, we need to make sure the news the consumers get is authentic, right? That's all we care. That's what we're after, not about the individual news organizations. So in that sense, I believe it makes sense.
I think that we're talking about private keys, identity talking about. So if your news has a public key that you can recognize, you build trust. So I think that's the way news will go, that we will trust people from their identities.
That's correct, yeah, I agree.
Okay, one last question.
talking about the irreversibility of the blockchain, and we have a big European law coming up called GDPR. I'm a little bit interested in, like a lot of companies are working really hard on solving their infrastructure to make that work for them. And with the blockchain, if you store private information and it's irreversible, you can't take it away. So yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on that and how you think about that?
I think I can actually, because that's a huge issue for us right now in the Swedish Land Registry and Blockchain project. We actually had many arms of government invited to a workshop where we tried to figure out how to handle this. So a blockchain is immutable. So if we store identity directly on the what's that sound? Directly on the blockchain, then that probably runs afoul of the GDPR. But if a government or a government institution says they need the information, then it's okay to have it. If you enter a contract and you're party to a contract, you're not allowed to say that I want to be deleted from the contract because I want to be forgotten, because you're in a business agreement, so you can't do it. So there are a couple of areas where you can actually keep information without it having to be forgotten. Then there are papers, academic papers coming out trying to analyze what would be allowed to do. If we can anonymize, if we can hash stuff, if we could have a random number on the blockchain connected through a normal database to an identity. We don't know. What we do know is that the European Union has a working group for making blockchains easier. And I think the whole GDPR system, they don't know about blockchains. So we basically, in our system, we're saying we anonymize it until they give up, basically. Because we can't compromise on the immutability because we don't have a blockchain anymore.
All right, thank you. So that was the last question we had time with. I want to thank our panel, who has been super helpful, and I find this very inspirational. I truly believe that we are building something great, and this is just the first couple of baby steps in the blockchain revolution that we will be having. Thank you. Round of applause. Thanks.